A scene is working to me if a hero is making a decision at the end of that scene that was different from before.
Pedro, I believe you said you're kind of type A when it comes to building and breaking down a story. What does this mean, type A?
I think it means obsessive and annoying, which I fully wear as a badge of honor. I know a lot of writers who I'm friends with who are a little bit more free-flowing, and that's always shocking to me because when I first learned how to kind of write properly, when I first got Save the Cat, you know, when I was in my late teens and started reading that, I was like, oh, there's like a method behind the madness. I got obsessed with that. And I wanted to learn everything under the sun so that I could break it all. And I find that to be important in my process, where it's like, let me turn over every single stone, use every single tool that I appreciate and like and that's helpful to me, just so I know where I can get away with breaking the pattern and breaking the convention.
So kind of you can't break the rules until you know the rules type of
That's
mindset?
how I feel. Yeah, that's how I feel. And I didn't always feel that way. You know, writing My Dead Dad, my first movie, I definitely more of a conventional story. Like that was another Pedro. And my third film and fourth film and fifth film will be all different Pedros. But I now understanding how to build that kind of foundation, I'm looking at any way I can kind of hit it with an axe, essentially.
And you said previously that using Final Draft was important to you. Do you always use screenwriting software, or do you also sometimes just handwrite?
I love to handwrite. It depends what stage I'm at in the process, but in ideation stage, I love to handwrite. And I don't know exactly what it is. Number one, it's just so easy to get distracted with something that has internet on it, first of all. That's my own problem. But I think it goes beyond that, where there's something kind of tactile, there's something that removes one more thing in between you and your story that helps a lot when you handwrite. It just makes me think different, almost, in a weird way. And what I'll do is I'll handwrite the movie, essentially, like rough scenes, and then dictate, or transcribe them rather on Final Draft. And that gives me an opportunity to read my initial vomit of glitter and creativity, if you will, and to kind of translate that into, okay, now how can I structurize this? How can I really treat it like a mechanic would?
How do you break down a scene?
So breaking down a scene, the three kind of important things I look at to me are external conflict, emotional conflict, and philosophical conflict. So external conflicts, like what's happening in the scene, like I have to run to a meeting and somebody's a garbage truck is blocking in my car. Like that is an external conflict. There's something in the way of what I want. Skipping over emotional, philosophical conflict is closer to should I just like go around the garbage truck? But to do that, I have to kind of like break through the neighbor's fence, and I don't know, that's philosophically not in line with what I'm willing to do to get what I want. That's being a bad neighbor, that's being a bad person, right? That's kind of more like worldview, high level stuff. And then emotional conflict is, oh my God, my dad, he used to be a garbage man, and I just can't, I can't stand up to this guy who's blocking this driveway because I could never stand up to my dad. So this is a really goofy off-top example, but 3 layers of conflict that you can play with in that scene. And then moreover that, kind of taking a step back, something that I like to do with stories is 4-corner opposition of philosophical beliefs. So your 4 main players in your story will have different beliefs, right? And you'll label them as like, you'll have 2 characters that believe the same thing. One's like a pro of that philosophical belief, and one's like a perceived con. So like you can have a protagonist and antagonist, a villain, believe the same thing, but for different reasons. One is a little bit more like, okay, I understand, that's like a the ideal side of this belief. The other side is the same belief, but the cons of that, you know what I mean? And that goes a lot with like war, for example, like, oh, we want to, invade a country or whatever because it'll make peace in the world. You know what I mean? Versus somebody else is like, no, I don't want to invade anybody because I want peace in the world. And their goals and their beliefs are the same thing, but drastically different, specifics of that. And then just to cap that, the other side is just opposing beliefs completely. Like, I'm trying to use a better example, but nonetheless, the opposite of what these people think and the pros and cons. And then you get to see them kind of change over the story. So external, emotional, philosophical conflict in the micro parts of a scene, but then dictated by their beliefs, by these 4 characters' beliefs. That's how I kind of like to approach a scene and a story as a whole.
That's not Dan Harmon's story circle?
No, different, but a lot of, I don't know if everyone kind of plugs and plays those things, but I definitely plug all those things into that. That's kind of like a whole other echelon, but yeah. It's different, but can be used together.
Interesting, okay. Yeah. Can you talk about how you identify conflict in a scene?
Well, if you can't identify conflict in a scene, then it's not much of a scene. That's the first thing. Like if there's nothing there, or you're having a tough time of being like, why isn't this working? Or like, why is this scene here? Usually it's because of the lack of conflict. So I think identifying the conflict, again, it's like, what's physically happening there, external, emotionally, what's led up to this, and philosophically, like why are these people different, essentially? And that's why I really like iconic characters, because usually how they act, how they present themselves, how they even dress or breathe will be completely different to the person opposite them in a scene. And if you're really attentive to those details, you can look at 2 people and be like, these 2 people believe the opposite things. I can already tell. This is maybe a woman in her 40s with blue hair and a hemp bag or whatever, next to a 19-year-old guy with like a sniper rifle on his back. You know what I mean? That image right there, you can see like, okay, there's probably more than just philosophical conflict, but different philosophical beliefs right from just the visual right there.
Why do you like to use 4 acts? And can you give us an overview of what happens in each act?
Yeah, I think the 4-act structure is just, obviously so genius that a lot of people use it. How I like to kind of break it down is, to put it simply, the old world and the new world. So where does this person start in their old world? Like, what is the pattern that they've been living their entire life? What is that kind of an inciting incident and choice to break that old world and go into a new world, which is Act 2.1. That midpoint, you get the chance to see, before that midpoint, you see all the benefits, perhaps, depending on your story structure, of that new world, this whole new world, bringing all these new things that are positive, or the opposite, negative, depending on your structure. But let's go with positive for this one. You get to see all these new things kind of filter into this person and change this person, this character. But then the midpoint, you start to see the cons. You start to see that underworld, right? So that's Act 2.2. Some people call it 3, I like to call it Act 1, 2.1, 2.2, and 3. Don't ask me why, but Act 2.2, or 3, is the kind of underworld of that. So it's still the new world, but it's that world flipped on its head. It's, I didn't think about that. I finally kind of got everything I wanted, but now I'm seeing all the things that I'm paying for, all the downsides of this thing. And then you have Act 3, I like to call it, or Act 4, if you call it that. The final act is where you get to see the synthesis of those things. So you get to see the strengths and everything this person knows in the old world meet with this new world that's in Act 2.1 and 2.2 in that final act, come together as like a synthesis of an orchestra of all the things that they've learned and ultimately the person they become, this mismatch and this person that they've grown into.
So in your movie, My Dead Dad, Act 1, skateboarding, kind of a free bird, living a life, and then gets a call?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Is that Act 2 when the call happens?
So in our story, to break down My Dead Dad, Act 1 is Lucas not... you can attach actually act breaks into their own thing of external, emotional, and philosophical conflict, but I guess just to let's use emotional conflict as an example. So in My Dead Dad, Act 1, emotionally for Lucas, the main character, is that I don't want anything to do with my dad. I hate him. He left us. He's an ass. Then Act 2.1 is him being like, and I have to deal with my dad, but now I'm hearing, and learning who this man was after he died, through the tenants in the building, through living his life essentially as now he has to become a landlord for his dad's properties. So he's getting to walk quite almost literally in his dad's shoes. So he's starting to kind of get you know what, maybe he wasn't such an ass. And then that midpoint happens, we go into 2.2, and then we realize that, you know what? He actually was, because I realized that all the things that my mom was telling me about him, like all the divorce kind of stories that washed over me my entire childhood, were actually true. And you know what? Also, my mom was lying about stuff too. So I don't even I can't believe I broached family as a whole. I want out of all this, right? So he's seeing the cons, he's seeing the lies of the family kind of within and kind of bubble up. And then Act 3 is realizing that, you know what? I am also this person. I'm no better than my parents. The lies that I've told, or the kind of the heartache that I've lived is the same of my dad, is the same of my mom, right? So you know what, parents are just grown up kids and kind of accepting that. So there's an acceptance there. So that's emotionally. You could go through the external and the philosophical and stuff too, but that's a good way to break it down.
Coming up soon, Pedro, in a few minutes, we're going to have you watch a scene from a movie. Can you talk about your strategy of speculatively placing the scene into one of these 4 acts and the strategy that you're going to use to develop the idea?
Yeah. So I think it's about identifying, really when you take a scene out of context, it depends on the movie you want to make, right? So first you have to ask yourself, what am I seeing here? And really, as the writer or the filmmaker, not even identifying where it should go, but where you want it to go. And where you put it will dictate the rest of the story. So, for example, if this character that we're about to see has a lot to learn, right, and has massive character flaws, and they're on the precipice of maybe broaching that's going to go in Act 1. Versus somebody who is overwhelmed by by growth, is being picked apart in this world where they feel fish out of water. If we see that in the scene, that's probably going to go 2.1 is where I would throw it. If it's a rom-com, for example, and we're seeing them be kicked around and are heartbroken, that's probably going to go in 2.2. I could see that, being the all is lost kind of stage. Or if they're heading towards, rounding up kind of the troops and they're really driving, at a new pace that we're seeing from them, or we're guessing they come from, then that's probably going to be Act 3. So it's an interesting question, because there's probably a million different kind of clues you could arm yourself with, but I think ultimately every story is different, and I could put a scene into Act 2.1 that somebody else would put in 2.2, depending if it's a tragedy or a drama or a comedy or just the way they like to tell a story.
And then can we talk a little bit about the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis?
Yeah. So essentially kind of going back to the 4-act structure, you have your Act 1, that's intro, essentially, and then thesis is the Act 2.1, antithesis or antithesis. Sometimes I like to say antithesis just to really drill it into my head that it's this is the opposite of the thesis. That will go in 2.2. It's kind of like the cons of the story, if you will, to really simplify it. And then synthesis is Act 3. those things coming together.
What is your process for thinking up key scenes or set pieces?
Key scenes in specific, in my opinion, should have external conflict, emotional conflict, and philosophical. So what I like to call momentum scenes, scenes that are not key scenes, right? Because if you have 40 scenes in a movie, I like to make sure there's at least 8 to 13 key scenes in there, and that you can kind of like look to Blake Sliner's beat sheet essentially, and that's sort of what I base that on. Of like, there's about 15 main like points in a movie, but 2 of those, one's the opening image and the other's final image, so those usually aren't conflicted. That leaves 13 there. So those 13 scenes, those should have triple layer conflict, and then the rest of the scenes, like momentum scenes I like to call it, outside of those 13, can get by on either external or emotional conflict. Sometimes it's just external, sometimes it's just exposition, but I like to believe if a movie's truly great or truly driving, at least the movies that I like, even the momentum scene should have emotional or external, or sorry, emotional and external, or one of the combo, 2 of the 3 kind of conflicts, if that makes sense.
How do you know if a scene is working or not?
A scene is working to me if a hero is making a decision at the end of that scene that was different from before. If there's no change, if you just watched a scene and it didn't change your character in any way, or there's not a new kind of fork in the road for your character, probably doesn't need to be in there, or make it be necessary to your story and give, have it lead to an important decision that your character needs to make. And not only just a decision, but a character decision that your audience is gonna lean into and be like, oh, like if you just watched that scene and somebody took your TV remote or smashed the projector in a movie theater, you'd want the audience to be like, oh, no, wait, what happened? Like, what did she end up doing in the next scene? Like, I wanna know. And so if you don't have that character making a decision, there's not much else to tune into, so, yeah.
If a scene is not working, how do you make it better?
Identify conflict. There's just so many scenes that don't have conflict. But also scenes that do have all the things in the paint by numbers kind of structure of it, sometimes they're just not fun, or sometimes they're just not charming. So that's kind of like a last pass I like to do with scenes and movies in general, of being like, great, this totally works, like on paper, amazing philosophical conflict, a bunch of stuff happens externally, emotionally I feel it, but is it fun to watch? Even if it's like a tragedy or whatever, it's like, and that's sort of where the set pieces come in, where it's like, cool, could this be more interesting in a library? This breakup scene, like, and they have to be quiet, that's a good kind of device just to really shake up a scene, just kind of writing a 50 things, I like to call it, just 50 of your worst ideas of like the location of a scene. Does that change the conflict? Does that change the charm? Does it make it funny? Does that make, even if it's a tragedy, like if it's a little funny, that's like now operating at a new level. That's how I like to kind of identify, hey, can I add some charm to the scene?
Right, or have them at like a grocery store or something. And,
yeah.
There's like someone restocking and you're like talking about intimate things, right? And the person's like embarrassed by like your conversation or something.
Yeah, or a movie like this movie I love, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. They're plotting this kind of environmental, quite literal explosion, right? They're gonna blow up this pipeline. Might be interesting to see one of those scenes in like of them plotting, maybe not in their basement, where they're alone and they're safe, but could we have that happen at like the DMV? One of them needs to renew their ID and they just don't have time and time's running out and they're discussing this in somewhere like that. That changes the temperature of the scene completely, and the stakes and maybe even the comedy again. It's like all of a sudden a really dramatic scene that's like intense is like, okay, it's still intense, but now it's like intense to a new level because of context, and also maybe even a little funny where, You know, you have a guy, you know, snoring behind you or whatever, waiting because you're there for like 6 hours at the DMV. I don't know.
He didn't make an appointment, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you should make an appointment.
Always make an appointment. And I love that movie, by the way, but that's just the alt kind of direction.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.